Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. The Feminist press publishes literary and educational books, and it's one of the most unusual and interesting publishers around. It's an advocate for women writers and women's lives. Gloria Jacobs, a feminist activist and writer herself, is the executive director, and I'm very happy to say she's my guest today. So welcome.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about the history or about Feminist Press.
Well, the Feminist Press, as you may know, is 37 years old, which is an extraordinary lifetime for an independent publisher. It's really amazing. And it started in 1970, and the idea was to try and create books for women's studies, which was this brand new field of study. Yeah, and there was nothing out there. It was like people were trying to teach it, and there were no texts, no books. You know, women who had been writing for decades, centuries, their books were out of print or had never been published, and there were no curricula either. So the idea was to try and create resources for women's studies. And then Tilly Olson, God bless her, who, you know, was a great American writer who just passed away in January, yes, came to the press, came to Florence Howe, who was the founder, and said, you know, there are books out there that are really lost, that it's not just about women's studies, it's about women writers from the 19th century and beyond, and they're just moldering, literally, and you need to be publishing those. And so the first one was Life in the Iron Mills by Rebecca Harding Davis, and it was an incredible story of thwarted lives, really, and what that world and what the iron mills and what the factory life was like for women then. And we like to say Tilly really gave us our mission and our goal for many, many years.
And so it started, was it affiliated with the City University at the time?
No.
It was independent.
The very first time it was done, I think, out of Florence Howe's house, and, you know, they showed her mailbox because they asked for donations, and so the cover of the catalog was Florence's mailbox, where the first $100 came into the press.
Was it
It went to CUNY, Old Westbury, where I taught at one point too, and the press was there then. And then it came here to City University, I think, around 1980.
Right.
So it's a long time, 27 years here.
So it basically started, where did it get sold at the beginning then? Through college bookstores and things?
Mostly, yeah, or to professors,
right.
Course adoption.
So the first years then we're looking back and plucking out of what, obscure bookshelves and places, all these manuscripts. Was that the awakening? Was that then, what is that, Kate Chopin?
Kate Chopin, yeah.
So all these wonderful stories about what it was like. This is basically the height of the most recent women's movement, right?
Absolutely.
And it was when my friends all went back to graduate school to do women's studies, which was the very beginning.
And
we were all very intent on discovering, rediscovering, it wasn't rediscovering, the past, because women had never been...
We didn't have that history. Who had ever heard of Kate Chopin? Who had ever heard of Rebecca Harding Davis? You know, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, one of the first books the Feminist Press did was the Yellow Wallpaper, and we have sold something like 300,000 copies of it since 1970. You know, the story of a woman going mad, literally out of frustration because she can't get out there and work and do and be an active participant in life.
So it was wonderful lessons. So now, are the books sold in regular bookstores?
Absolutely. We have a distributor. We're all around the country. We're part of, you know, it's a sort of great thing about independent publishers now is that they've all come together. And so there are just a few distributors who handle them. But there's the sort of strength of numbers that has come from that. So we have really excellent distribution.
And they still go in, and they go into a lot of these chain stores.
We go into the chains. We are available through Google. We're available on Amazon. You can read on Google, and, you know. So we're starting to get into ebooks. We're talking about podcasts. So there are lots of ways.
It's not only independent, it's also nonprofit.
Yeah.
So the publishing business has always confused me. You know, there are so many books that get published. Such short lives, basically. Some of them which are never reviewed, or if they're reviewed, it's a little review. How do they sell, and how does a publisher make any money on them? Is it by the book cover?
How do the rest of them survive? I have no idea.
You know, it's just unbelievable.
No, I do know, basically. They are looking, obviously, for the big numbers and the big bestsellers, and they'll take a gamble on a few books that they think will sort of coast along and not make a lot of money, but they look to make all their money in the first 1, 2, maybe 3 years, and then it's gone. It's out of print. So to some extent, that's where our strength is, because we can come back and look at it and say, you know, maybe that book shouldn't be out of print.
Yeah.
We're still doing books, you know, just from the 80s that are already out of print.
So what does it mean when it's out of print? It means that you can buy it or you can just take it?
Well, no, we would have to buy the rights from the author or their estate or whatever else.
I see.
You know. But I think the thing about the Feminist Press, there are two things we do that make it easier for us. One is we raise money, which is the hard part of it. But we never put a book out of print unless it's really, really out of date in some way that makes it irrelevant, because we think that there is always someone out there who will want that book. We're not looking to make millions of dollars off of it, so if it sells 50 copies a year, that's okay with us. That's not okay with Random House, or I shouldn't say, but
yeah,
I'm sure that's right. So we have a large backlist, you know, over 300 books. They're always available. And it just keeps growing. And also, because we're a nonprofit, we can say, this book will never be a bestseller, but it's really important for classwork, for someone, for individuals. It's a great writer. We know there are lots of great writers who don't get published because some publishing house thinks they won't sell 100,000 copies
and
of the book.
They're not all what you consider great writers who people may think you can't understand what they're writing about. They're so philosophical or something. I love the catalog has Faith Baldwin. These are all books that were popular when I was a kid.
That's
you know,
right.
they were the Pulp Fiction, basically.
Yes, yeah.
Detective stories,
Yeah.
they're great,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So Laura is even one of your books.
Laura is one of them, and you know, Bunny Lake is Missing is one of them, which Reese Witherspoon is apparently making into a movie again.
Oh, that's so good. So that helps you.
It helps us enormously.
Oh, that's so great.
But yeah, so these books still have a life, and that's part of it. You know, I mean, now it makes sense to do pulps, but you know, 10 years ago when we were first thinking of it, a lot of these other publishing houses would never have touched them. So it's you know, I think our importance is to be totally out there and open to anything that's by and about women, and figuring out, you know, who wants that, how to use it, how to sell it, how to get it out there.
But now, in recent years, you've expanded to the world. And you're publishing women who may be published in their own countries, but who aren't necessarily translated into English.
Right.
As well as original books.
Yes, we've done a lot of that. And my goal is certainly to do more, but let me first talk about some of the ones that we've already done. I mean, one of the most extraordinary is Tuba and the Meaning of Night. It's a novel by an Iranian woman. Nobody liked her in Iran. She was imprisoned by the Shah's government. She was imprisoned by the Ayatollah's governments. And while she was in prison, the second time under the Ayatollah, she was in prison for, I think, 4 years.
Why was she in prison?
Because she spoke out, because she was an uppity woman, because her politics were not what they would have liked them to be. And she started writing a novel in prison on sheets of paper, you know, that I think were smuggled into her. And after she got out, she looked at what she'd written and didn't like it and burned it all. And then sat down and wrote again. But I think that experience of prison and that experience of struggling to find the words, she ended up with a masterpiece. It's an extraordinary novel. It was a bestseller in Iran until it was banned, once again, by the government. And she left. She's in exile now in the United States. So our translation in English was the only available version of the book for many years. And now it's been translated into a few other languages as well.
Did you commissioned the person to do it?
Yeah.
And you actually published it?
Yeah.
So when you do that, what's the run? How many do you print at the first time?
8,000, 10,000. And then we go back. We're about to bring it out in paperback now, so it'll have a new run. We'll print another 8,000.
That's great.
So it's not huge, but it reaches people, and they sell consistently. And when we run out, we print more. You know.
Yeah. You have writers from India, Africa, all over Africa, right?
All over Africa. We have extraordinary series, Women Writing Africa. And it's nearly 500 years of women's writings from the four
So you've gone back
regions.
there, too.
Yes, yeah. So it's oral histories that are now written down, it's poetry, it's letters from the 1800s, and letters from slave women, as well as, say, the Princess of Zanzibar, you know, the range of people who managed to get an education and be able to express themselves in some ways, and speeches. So, you know, people don't realize how long that history of women's voices and women's writings, how far back it goes.
And then you have a woman in Baghdad who had a blog, right?
She still
does.
has a blog. This is, you know, this is, for me, one of the proudest things for me about the feminist press, and one of the most important books that I think we do. And I have to say, from the very start, it was brought to the press by Jean Casella, the former executive director, and she deserves enormous credit for bringing it. It is a blog by a young woman. She calls herself Riverbend. She was a computer programmer at the age of 23, 24 in Baghdad at the start of the war. And her world blew up, you know, so she went to work one day and they said to her, "We really don't want women working here anymore." And this was, you know, in the very beginning, but everyone was sort of scared and trying to figure out what is happening here. And I think for whatever reasons, they just said no women working here anymore. And she was devastated because computers were her life. And again, we don't think of that in Baghdad. Everyone has this idea in Iraq that, you know, it's this sort of conservative Muslim country, and it wasn't at all. I think it is now, but. So she went home and sat in front of her computer and started blogging about what she was seeing. And you know, as we say, she is the most extraordinary embedded journalist because she lives this life every day in the heart of Baghdad in a way that no Western journalist could ever know or understand. And she reports on everything, you know, the parties they have, standing in line for gas, you know, the militia coming to the house and taking people away, searching for bodies of relatives. I mean, she can be witty and funny and bitter and becoming, obviously, increasingly more and more and more bitter. It's absolutely devastating.
How is she supported?
She lives with her family.
I know, but if they're not working, this is what I always wonder about.
Yeah.
The business is bombed. They don't have any business. You can't go out. How do they live?
You know, she doesn't say, and it's something we are very cautious about communicating with her because it's easy to, as we know, it's easy to hack. It's easy for someone to start to try and figure out who she is, and
no, you don't want that.
We can't do that. So, and I think that may be also why we don't know those details because she's cautious about not giving too much away either.
Now, what do you do with that Well, the blog is there for anybody who wants to look at it.
But what's really interesting...
Do people look at it?
Oh, yeah.
And does the news media look at it?
Yes.
I mean, there have been stories about it?
Yes. There have been stories in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, many, many stories. Incredible. London Times, The Guardian in London. She is one of the premier, you could say, bloggers out of Iraq for people who really want to understand what's going on. And she has an incredible following. And if you talk about the book business, you might have said, well, then why would a book sell if they can go online? But the book sells extraordinarily well because I think, people like having it in some form where they can carry it around, where they can, you know, go in and out, and that it's put together in one place rather than scrolling through a computer and sitting at a computer. And so what seems to be happening, which is very interesting in terms of the e-world, is that the book and the blog sort of, you know, help each other and bring more people to the blog and more people to buying the book. So it's, you know,
it's, what is the e-world? What do you mean by that?
Well, the idea of people doing everything online, from, you know, having their YouTube, you know, having books, having their music, you know, there certainly is.
Basically reading books online. Right. And then they were even fiddling around with the little machines that you can just read a book, right?
Well, and that's the idea, right?
You are a student, basically, it seems to me, of women internationally with war and peace. I mean, you've done a lot of studies for the UN before you came here.
Yeah.
What did you tell us about?
Well, you know, the most extraordinary one I did was with Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the new president of Liberia. And I had been at Ms. for many years, and then Ms. moved to California.
You were the editor?
I was the executive editor.
Executive editor.
And
of Ms. Magazine.
Ms. Magazine. A beloved institution for all of us.
Share,
yes, yes. And so at that point, I had some friends at the UN who said, well, if you're not going to California, you know, come over here and help us with this project. And it was working on a report on women, war, and peace is what we called it. But it came out of the fact that the Security Council, for the first time in history, recognized that women were impacted by war as well as men in an official way. They recognized it. I mean, obviously, we all knew it. But there had been this huge effort to talk about women's rights as human rights and talk about rape during war. And it culminated to some extent in what's called Resolution 1325, which is on women, peace, and security, which said that someone has to look at this and we have to understand what it means that women are raped during war and civil events, that they often are left trying to support families with no means whatsoever. They are uprooted from their homes. Men die during war, there's no question, and many women do as well, but women are left holding the reins and trying to pull it all together again. So UNIFEM decided to do a report on that to support 1325 and show what was happening in a really specific way. And they had Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and Elizabeth Wren, who's the former defense minister in Finland, and the fact that a woman was a defense minister, obviously it was a Scandinavian country that did it. Travel around the world to 14 sites and interview women in camps and, you know, in their homes and wherever, and went to war zones. And then I came and helped put that all together and create a book out of it and talk about not just the horror of what was happening, which was really awful, but what women were doing during Reconstruction, what women needed in order to reconstruct their lives, and really how to move forward. And that was why it's women, peace, and security, not women and war in the end. It's really about how to achieve peace and security.
It was interesting that just recently in the paper there was a long story about women members of the armed forces who were raped and sexually harassed. And it's just something that is a vulnerability that just seems to always be there.
Well, you know,
what do we do in this world?
That's why we still need feminism, isn't it? You know, I mean, it's really, we have to talk about these issues all the time, all the time. And I'm very aware that we have achieved so much. When I look at my mother's life compared to mine, there's no comparison, but certain issues just are embedded, you know, if you want to use that word again, and it's very, very hard to root out. And violence against women clearly is one of them. It's
interesting because it's in my lifetime also. I mean, I'm now getting to span something. You know, when I was young, you could check a box and say, I'm a woman, I don't want to serve on a jury.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Anyway, the Feminist Press is now an NGO, which means a non-governmental organization. What does that mean? This is at the UN, right? Internationally.
Yes.
Explain what that means.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Oh, all right.
No, it means that we go to UN events, that we, you know, are involved with people there and we talk to them. But, you know, the UN it's such a big organization. And so everybody comes together every once in a while and talks, and it's wonderful. It's networking.
Well, it's wonderful for you, yes.
Yeah.
And do you discover books from it or something?
We haven't yet, but you know, I have hopes. You know, one of the hard things, and one of the things that thrilled me about coming to the Feminist Press from the UN is you have so many constituents at the UN who want a say in the final product, and rightfully so. You know, it affects their government, they're supporting it in numerous ways. But so it means that some of the publications that come out of there, and I don't think Women, War, Peace is one, but some of them are very cautious. And I don't want the feminist press to be cautious. Absolutely
We can't
not.
be. We have to be audacious and
absolutely
just go. So if people want to see the list of books that you have, can they go to your website and they can find the books?
www.feministpress.org.
But they don't buy them from you?
Yes.
Oh, you
they
can?
buy them
oh,
online.
that's great.
You see?
Yeah.
The new e-world. We're there.
Oh, good. And then how do you raise money?
Knock on doors, you know, go to foundations. We have a gala every year where people buy tickets and that supports it. But it's really, it's very interesting. There's a lot of support out there, but I also think it's hard because, partially because the world is changing and people are thinking, are books where I want to put my money? Is it, you know, new media of some sort? You know, I have a very dear friend to me who said to me, you know, books are old media. We're done with that.
Oh, that's so awful because they say that about the newspaper business, television. I mean,
it's just not true, though. I mean, that's what I realized. It's just not true. People are always talking to me about the books they read, even before I came to the feminist press. I think books have an enormous impact on people's lives that computers just can't duplicate yet. They may someday,
well, I hope they don't, because it's a book not only means that you're reading and learning something, but you've got time to yourself. You're not being bombarded with the noise and other people. And we don't have that much time to ourselves nowadays. I think the books are a wonderful way of learning what's really happening in the world or understanding. I love to read books now by women of their stories, and you know, there are other books not only on the feminist press, but from India and things. But I mean, how else are we really going to learn what a culture is like? And it's very important not only to know what's going on in the world, but this country has so many different people coming into it, so many cultures, that it's really, I think, essential to a successful assimilation.
Absolutely, and but it is also essential for us to understand where we fit into the world as a country, you know, and I think something like Tuba and the Meaning of Night about Iran and understanding some history of Iran and what people have gone through there, I think these things are critical. I'm speaking at IBM next week because they want their engineers and scientists to understand the world better, even though they're not going to be sent to India to work, which I guess is good.
So are you selling them books in a large amount?
Not yet, but I think we will.
Maybe you should tell them that they have to, for you to come, they have to buy. You know?
No, they are buying for that event, but I want more. I want more.
They've got to do that. You should develop a curriculum for corporations that are doing international business and stuff like that. Anyway, how did you become a feminist? I'm always interested to know what goes into developing a person.
I credit my mother, but not in the normal way.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Irvington, New Jersey, which was recently named the crime capital of New Jersey.
Oh, dear.
I grew up in a housing project with a single mother. My father, they were divorced. My father was around, but it was my mother they were divorced, and my mother was supporting 3 of us with 2 jobs. And I was the only girl. Her greatest hope for me was that I would marry a doctor and move to the suburbs.
Naturally.
And given that background, I could understand why. I mean, she would say, I don't want you to have to do what I have to do. But underneath that message, there was this incredible strength. You saw this woman doing everything, utterly devoted to her children, willing to do anything to see that we, you know, got ahead and were happy, not just, you know, at all costs. And so what I saw was her strength, even though she poo-pooed it, you know, and wanted something else. So that was the start of it, absolutely. And she is now 93 and still going strong.
I must be proud of you.
Amazing. She's amazing. But then, after college, I was living in New York for a while. I was a social worker because I thought I wanted to do good in the world. And I was working with Cuban refugees, and I didn't speak Spanish. It was sort of a classic New York scene, like they said, okay, here's a job, you know, with the welfare department. And I just thought, this is nuts. And I had a friend in the Peace Corps who was in Ethiopia, and she said, you know, come visit and think about your life. And I quit my job. I flew to Ethiopia. I met someone there from the Harvard Teachers Program who had just bought a tractor for the village my friend lived in, and he was driving it down to the village, and I got on the back of the tractor and drove for 5 days and discovered that everything I had known about life didn't mean anything anymore, that there was just this whole other way of being in the world, which was for me about not being afraid, not being, you know, I was actually fairly sheltered despite my upbringing, and suddenly, as I said,
timid and worry about what people think and all that kind of stuff.
And suddenly that was gone. And it was the most freeing thing I ever did in my life. And then, you know, I traveled through Africa on my own and hitchhiked, and suddenly realized, how could you not be a feminist if this is what it means to be a free woman, you know, and to truly be liberated?
And that stayed with you all this time.
How could it not, really?
So did you start writing from Africa?
I started writing from Africa. I was working as a journalist for the Ethiopian Herald, and I did something for the Times of London, and started doing it. But also, you know, I should add, even though I was in Ethiopia during the early 70s when the Vietnam War was still going on, we were very, very aware of it there. And so I think, like with everyone, my politics were a combination of anti-war, feminism, civil rights. You know, there was just so much to think about. And for me, being outside my own culture, it was suddenly so easy to see, wait a second, this doesn't quite make sense. So that had an enormous impact on what my politics became.
So we've come to the end of the half hour. It goes so quickly.
It did.
So I'm glad that you're pursuing peace and justice and information and knowledge for all of us. And we wish you luck. And I hope that people will go to the website and buy some books and really find the enrichment that is there. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.